Hey guys, it's Michael from EAKCrewProductions, and today we're going to talk about Macrocosmos and Dimensional Fissure. Now, most of the people that talk to me about these cards are always asking me, hey, why do some people play macro over dimensional, and why do some people play dimensional over macro? Because when they look at the card, they say, this is pretty much the same thing. And I'm going to talk to you today about the extreme differences of these two cards. Alright, first off, macro. Alright, so the basis of these two cards is that they send things to the banish zone instead of removal zone. Macrocosmos sends spells, traps, and monsters, while Dimensional Fissure only sends monsters. Now, let's talk about some of the extreme differences and why these two cards should not be thought of anywhere near the same. Okay, so let's start with Dimensional Fissure since it's the spell. Dimensional Fissure is a continuous spell card, which means right off of the back, you can play it first turn face up. Now, that is the advantage that it has over Macrocosmos, and the advantage there is that your opponent can no longer effect Veiler you on your first turn. So you can literally start out Dimensional Fissure Macro Rabbit. Well, if you had started Macrocosmos Macro Rabbit, you'd have a face down Macrocosmos and a Veilered Rabbit. See the difference? It exists. That's a very big difference. Now, another difference that people don't understand right off the bat is like something with Inzectors. Monsters that are treated as equipped spell cards, if MST'd or sent to the graveyard, while being treated as equipped spell cards with Dimensional Fissure on the field, will go to the graveyard. Why is that so crazy? Because let's say I don't know, have a Dragonfly and a Hornet. I get to pop things, even with a Dimensional Fissure face up on the field, and have my Hornet go to the graveyard and keep retrieving it to pop all your things. That's extraordinarily good to know. Alright, if you don't know that, it could lose you an entire duel. It could have you not citing an amazing card. Alright, moving on. Another thing with Dimensional Fissure is that when I exceed, I take two monsters that are the same level and I overlay them over and I have a black card on the field now. Now let's say I use my Exceeds power. Like let's say I have a Maestroke and I want to set your monster face down defense position. Those materials are no longer considered monsters. They're considered materials, and because of that, they go to the graveyard with a Dimensional Fissure face up on the field. So let's say I have a light in the graveyard and I open up and I have a BLS in my hand and a Tour Guide. I can go Tour Guide into a Leviathan Dragon. I can then detach, making it a 2,500, and the Tour Guide will go to my graveyard. I can then banish the light and the newly added Tour Guide to special summon BLS. This is a play that doesn't exist with Macrocosmos, and that's why you have to know the difference between the two. Alright, now let's start talking about Macrocosmos and the different things with that. Alright, first off, you need to understand that Macrocosmos also special summons a monster. It doesn't have to, but it has the ability to, and because of that, it can be stopped by Solemn Warning, which is a con. However, can also cause your opponent to waste a card that drains them 2,000 life points on a Macrocosmos that maybe you open double of. Who knows? But it does have that negative ability of more cards being able to stop it, and that's the whole point there. However, Macrocosmos also shuts down more decks because of its power to not only banish monsters, but spells and traps and anything that would ever touch the graveyard ever. I make an XYZ and I detach, it gets banished. I have a Hornet Dragonfly thing, I can't go to the grave. I can't go to the grave to get the effects off because they get banished. DD Crowin, all that junk, it all gets banished. But Macrocosmos is a trap card, so for it you have to wait a turn, which
is something that is a little whack, and it also means that your opponent has the ability to get those chained MSTs in and all those kind of things. But what Macrocosmos has going for it is its ability to stop those spells and traps, and that's really important, especially in this meta, because we have things like Fire Fists. Why is that good? Because Fire Fists need to send their spell and trap for fire formations to the grave. They must go to the grave to get their effects. With Macrocosmos, they can no longer send those cards to the grave. Thus, they will not get their effects. Now, you have to activate the Macrocosmos first, because sending those things to the graveyard is a cost. So, as soon as they summon the bear, go Macrocosmos and Alright. It also is going to be very relevant with spellbooks coming out, because even though they have Spellbook of Elma, or whatever it is, that lets them return a banished spellbook from their zone to their hand, it's not like the deck has 50 of them. They're going to be using their cards, and you're going to banish them all, and they're going to run out of the ability to fetch them, and Tower's not going to have any targets to reshuffle. They're not going to have any draw engines. You're going to destroy Tower. They're not even going to be able to special summon a monster from their grave. Yada, yada, yada. Priestess will have no effect, because it won't have anything to banish. And everything will go downhill for them. I think people are forgetting that, yeah, spellbooks are good, but Game 2 and 3, they're extraordinarily beatable. Extraordinarily beatable. Plus, they have problems getting over monsters that destroy anything. I mean, sure, they can protect their monsters with spells and traps, and they do have that one card to banish, but if I summon a Chaos Sorcerer and use Lance on it, I'm just going to banish your Priestess, and you're never saying hello to it again. But I digress. Also, let's talk about what else do we have about Macrocosmos. We've talked about its 2000 power. We've talked about its ability to get rid of spells and traps. And I feel like there's more there that I'm just forgetting at the moment because I got so excited about those other things. But Macrocosmos in general is just a stronger shutdown card because it doesn't allow your opponent to use any graveyard mechanics at all. And that's the whole point between Macrocosmos and Dimensional Fissure. Dimensional Fissure is more lenient. It gets rid of monsters that are very important to the opponent, but at the same time, it allows certain plays to become possible, and there is a play around factor of the card. With Macrocosmos, however, it's pretty plain and simple. It's just, if anything that you have gets destroyed or would be sent to the graveyard, it's getting banished instead. And Macrocosmos shuts things down. Oh, this is what I was going to talk about. Six Sams. This is another deck that is becoming very popular. If you have Macrocosmos face up on the field, they can't use their double-edged sword technique because they're not going to have any targets in the graveyard. But more importantly, they can't use their Six Samurai United to get those insane pluses because that's a spell card, but it has to go to the graveyard for it to work. And Macrocosmos says no, you can't do that. And things like Chaos Dragons, it completely obliterates Chaos Dragons, and just all these different decks are so hurt by this one card. And Dimensional Fissure is somewhat similar, but it's a card that decks that don't need the graveyard a lot can use. While Macrocosmos just says, if you touch this grave at all, you're done. You know, it's a no for me. But anyways, you guys, that's your main man, Mike from EAKCrewProductions. That is the Dimensional Fissure Macrocosmos debate. And I'll see you guys later. Peace. Subscribe.